Hey guys, what is up? Steven here. Going to do a quick video about some low-key free agent signings that the Chargers could look into. Obviously, I don't have any sources, just kind of me making some connections and talking about some players that I think could come in and fill some depth roles for this team. We've talked about a lot about the higher end guys like Leonard Floyd, Leonard Williams, John Johnson, Alejandro Villanueva, all those guys. So I figured I would take the time to mention some low key depth signings. Someone in the mold of a Nick Vigil who could come in and fill, a very necessary role and step up in key moments when called upon. And I think that really, those kind of signings can make or break a roster depending on injuries and things like that. And then you can never have too much depth. And so I wanted to highlight some guys here. I've got some secondary guys, defensive line, special teams, even, and of course, offensive line. So I want to get that started here first and foremost with PJ Williams. Now, you might not know who he is. He's not a very well recognized player around the league. He's definitely not a high end secondary player. But for the Saints, he's filled in a lot of different roles. He's played in the box as a box safety. He's played in the slot as a nickel. He's played out wide as a corner, and he's logged a lot of snaps at free safety. And perhaps most importantly, in terms of depth roles, he does come with a lot of special teams experience. So while he's not a spectacular player, the Rams did move a lot of their secondary players around quite a bit. And so having a low key addition that could come in and fill a versatile role, I kind of would just prefer them to sign Jalen Watkins again at this point. But if they do decide to go elsewhere, they do have that connection with the linebackers coach, who was obviously coaching with the Saints last year. So I think PJ Williams could fit in nicely for the Chargers in terms of secondary. The second one that I want to talk about here is Roy Robertson Harris, the defensive lineman from the Chicago Bears. When I initially posed this question on Twitter a few weeks ago, he was a name that came up quite a lot. So maybe he's not super low key, but I did want to mention him here. He obviously has played under both Brandon Staley and Jay Rogers, which is obviously something that could pay dividends for them. He did have a shoulder ending injury this past season, so he didn't play a whole lot in 2020. I believe that happened in like week 5 or 6. But in 2019 and 2020, he seemed like he was going to be on the rise. He didn't play a whole lot as a rookie, but he had a breakout season as a sophomore in 2018. And really, it was something that he showed that he could thrive in a different role as an interior and an outside pass rusher under Brandon Staley and Jay Rogers. So I think that connection there, the possibility of him kind of regaining that form would make a lot of sense for him. And for what it's worth, his wife did post on Instagram that they were leaving. So it doesn't seem like he's going to be back in Chicago. Obviously, don't trust social media all that much, but it does seem like he's on his way out here. All right, the last one here, the third big one, and then I'll mention some smaller guys later on too. But the big three here is going to be Kelvin Beachum. Kelvin Beachum, as a former seventh round pick, he's really carved out a very solid NFL career so far. He's definitely not a long-term starter kind of signing. I think that's kind of the difference, obviously, if you're getting a Trent Williams or Alejandro Villanueva, is that you're probably going to start those guys for 2 or 3 years, maybe 4 if you're lucky. But Kelvin Beachum, to me, I look at him. Everybody kind of talks about like a swing court or not a swing, excuse me, a bridge quarterback, right? Somebody that can step in and start until the rookie is ready. And so I think that's how I view Kelvin Beachum. He's not somebody that I'm, going out of my way to sign as a starting left tackle, but in terms of being a swing tackle, in terms of starting, while whoever they draft is waiting, I think that would be a good plan. So he's not going to be very expensive because again, he's not a long-term start. He's not a long-term asset at this point. The Cardinals signed him last year for the veterans minimum because they basically hoped to have him in that kind of role. While Josh Jones, the rookie out of Houston, was kind of figuring things out. Turned out that Beachum started the whole year. He just didn't. He just played so well that it just it didn't make any sense to put in Josh Jones. And so I think it gives them some flexibility, right? Because you can draft Elijah Vera Tucker or Rashawn Slater, and that kind of seems to be how this is trending. And you could start them at guard, and you could start Beachum at left tackle, and then down the road, if you want to move Elijah Vera Tucker or Slater back out to tackle, then Kelvin Beachum would obviously be released after the 2021 season. If you draft Christian Darrisaw and Darrisaw for whatever reason is not ready, or you think Darrisaw is more of a right tackle, you can play Kelvin Beachum and kind of figure it out. And the same thing kind of happens if they draft an edge rusher in the first round or a corner, and you draft a second round tackle like a James Hudson or Walker Little. Then Kelvin Beachum does give them that kind of bridge tackle while that second round or third round tackle develops. So, worst case scenario here is that you sign him for depth purposes, and it's the best swing tackle that the Chargers would have had under Tom Telesco. Very similar to like a Joe Barksdale kind of player, very solid, never been like a spectacular player. But he's kind of graded in like the high 60s, low 70s throughout his career, and just been very consistent. And I think the Chargers need that kind of player, be it at left tackle while they figure things out for a year, or as the swing tackle. I think makes a lot of sense. All right, so those are the big three names, more well-recognized names that I think I wanted to mention here, but I do want to get into some other ones. In terms of secondary pieces, Ryan Dyrud brought him up to me, and that's Will Parks. He played his first 4 seasons in Denver, and then the Eagles signed him at the start of the 2020 season. So he is very familiar with Ronaldo Hill and Brandon Staley because he did play for Denver while they were both there, obviously. And he's taken reps for the Broncos at the nickel and both safety spots. He's got a lot of experience on special teams. So again, he's got that kind of versatility I think Brandon Staley is going to be looking for in terms of secondary pieces. It's just that he was an undrafted free agent. He's not somebody that's going to come in and like change and start, start right away. But in terms of depth pieces, very similar to like a Jalen Watkins kind of player. The next one I want to talk about, we've talked a little bit about what they could possibly do with Linval Joseph. I don't think he's going to get cut. I just think, it doesn't really make any sense in terms of on the field because Linval Joseph was really good last year. But they do need to figure out a depth piece behind him, whether that's Braden Fehoko. I don't really know because, if they do go in the base 3-4 a lot, they're going to need a secondary nose tackle. So I bring that up because I'm going to bring up Rakeem Nunez-Roches here. Again, not a household name, really has only been a backup throughout his career. But when Vita Vea went down last season, Nunez-Roches did start for the Buccaneers down the stretch. Definitely not a flashy kind of player. He's definitely a run-stuffing tackle. Not going to give you a whole lot of pass rush ability. Definitely just more of a run-stuffing defensive player. And Ndamukong Suh speaks very highly of him as somebody that will clog the lanes and take on blocks, and the Chargers need that. And, I did a video on Brandon Staley's defense, and he really does prefer to have defensive tackles who will really just anchor down. And I think Rakeem Nunez-Roches would make a lot of sense as a flyer depth piece. And maybe like in the kind of scenario where they do cut Linval Joseph for cap space, you can take a cheap flyer on Nunez-Roches as somebody who's a young player, never really been given a chance to be a full starter and maybe develop him into something. So I think that one could make a lot of sense. In terms of skill players, I'm not really into the whole like sign a big name kind of skill players. We've seen that kind of backfire in the past. So these are kind of 2 guys that I think could make sense in terms of depth pieces. The first one is Devontae Booker, my guy out of Utah. Really was an amazing player for the University of Utah, but hasn't really panned out in the NFL as many of us would have hoped. But he's taken on a specialist role for the Broncos later in that tenure, and the Raiders last year. Really good special teams guy, really good as a pass protector and pass catcher. And so I think, in terms of bringing a veteran in for competition purposes, like sure they could bring in Kalen Ballage back, but Devontae Booker would make a lot of sense as somebody that could provide some stability in terms of that running back 3 spot. We don't really know if we can count on Justin Jackson. We don't know what Joshua Kelly is like. So I'm not bringing in Devontae Booker to be an RB2. But in terms of an RB3 special teams kind of guy, I think that would make a lot of sense. And then the other one here that I want to talk about is Kendrick Bourne, the receiver from the San Francisco 49ers. He was an undrafted free agent who they second round tendered last year. So they thought very highly of him, but they're not going to be able to afford to keep him around. He became a very solid and consistent option this past couple seasons for the 49ers. And, you know, while George Kittle has dealt with some injuries, it's been Kendrick Bourne to take on that red zone third down role. And he's been a very solid player for them. So I think that Kendrick Bourne is somebody that could come in and challenge for reps in terms of wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4, you know, challenge the Chargers to be a little more well-rounded. Again, early in his career, he did have some special teams experience as well. And he, of course, he is familiar with quarterbacks coach Shane Day. So that's always something to keep an eye on. All right. So moving back down to some offensive linemen. These are going to be interior depth pieces. I do think that they're going to have a cheap signing, whether that's a Kelvin Beachum, who I think would makes a ton of sense, or one of these guys in terms of filling an interior offensive line depth, you know, swing kind of role. The first one here is Nick Easton. Daniel Popper brought him up to us when we interviewed him. He's been a serviceable interior offensive lineman for the Saints and Vikings over the last 4 years. He's played all 3 interior spots and played center in college for Harvard, and did start a few games, mostly at center for the Vikings. And then for the Saints, he's mostly been a guard. So it's been a little up and down. He has had some concussion problems. Reportedly, I don't really know how much or how serious those concussions were. But it's been a little up and down, which is obviously why the Saints released him. They signed him to a significant $5 million contract. And so, you know, somebody that's been a little up and down and has some injury history, like that's a no-brainer in terms of cutting. So he's definitely not someone that I'm rushing to sign. However, you know, we just went through Ryan Groy and Tyree St. Louis as that interior offensive line depth. And so I think Nick Easton, while he wouldn't be a starter, I think as somebody that can come in and play all 3 spots on the interior, I think would make a lot of sense. And again, you know, familiarity with Joe Lombardi from their days together in New Orleans. So he's hovered right around in the high 50s, low 60s in terms of PFF grade. So again, not somebody that is going to be like a flashy starter offensive lineman, but in terms of depth, I think the Chargers could do much worse. The next one here is going to be Senio Clemente. I mentioned him on yesterday's show. I had no idea who this person was until Matthew Hendrickson, aka Get Some Sports, mentioned him to me when he got released from the Texans. And he's in a similar mold to what Nick Easton is, right? You know, he's not a starter. It was really up and down, really inconsistent for the Texans over the last couple of years. So really talking about Senio, you have to go back to his days for the Saints. Again, some familiarity with Joe Lombardi and some potential relationships there. I do believe he was there for Frank Smith's last year in New Orleans. His first year in New Orleans was Frank Smith's last year in New Orleans. So possible connection there. But when you look at his Pro Football Focus profile for his days in the Saints, he made starts at both tackle spots and both guard spots and did well. You know, that's the thing in terms of backups, right? Like you're hoping that they can come in and fill a variety of roles. And Senio did that for the Saints. Now, his experience as a starter for the Texans, you know, I don't know how much weight that's going to carry on the market. It was not pretty at times, but he did show flashes for it in 2018, his first year with the Texans. He had a really solid season for them. So I don't know what his market's going to be, but I think it would make a lot of sense to be able to have someone to come in as someone that can fill a variety of roles, like I said. Pat Elflein is another one in this mix from the Jets and the Vikings. His first year in Minnesota, he made the all-rookie team as a center, and he was drafted out of Ohio State, where he won the Remington Award as best center in college. So there is some pedigree there, perhaps some untapped potential, but it's been really up and down. And again, some injuries and things like that have contributed to his play. And he did get released by the Vikings last year, signed with the Jets for, I believe, 10 games. So he played okay with the Jets. He's not somebody that's going to be a starter, but somebody that can come in and fill a variety of roles. I think Elflein would make a lot of sense if he is available. Um, the last ones here before I get to the special teams guys, backup quarterbacks, right? We talked about this conversation. I don't think you can count on Easton Stick as the primary backup, and I think it would make a lot more sense to have a veteran who can come in and help Justin Herbert in terms of preparation and helping him continue to grow mentally, and that's really the biggest thing for me. Easton Stick, again, we just don't know who he is on the field. We don't know what he's like mentally, and he's not a veteran. So I would prefer to get somebody that's been around the block, so to speak, to get in there to help Justin Herbert out. So the first one I'm going to talk about is Colt McCoy. He only made a handful of starts over the last few years. Obviously, we know about Colt McCoy's days from Texas as one of the better college quarterbacks of that program. But he did enough in spot duty for the Giants over the past couple of years that I don't think he would be like, he's not a ship sinker like I think Houston Stick would be. So I don't think Colt McCoy would be very expensive because he's a little older. He's been in the NFL for a while. But the thing here with McCoy is that he's very familiar with the Kyle Shanahan system, which we don't really know exactly what the Chargers are going to run on offense. But Colt McCoy did play in Washington under Sean McVay and, of course, Kyle Shanahan and Shane Day, who was the offensive line assistant in Washington at the time. And so some potential connections there with Shane Day, as well as, some familiarity with at least some kind of the concepts that they're going to be running, which I think could be huge there. And then the obvious one in terms of connections, right, is CJ Beathard. He made a few starts for Jimmy G over the past couple of years. We all remember what he did against the Chargers. And obviously he's got some familiarity with the Shanahan system and with Shane Day. So I don't know in terms of like ability if he's much of an upgrade over Easton Stick, but he's got those relationships with Shane Day, the familiarity with the system, and he's been around the block. Like he has made some starts. So it seems like Nick Mullins is kind of the top backup choice in terms of San Francisco. So I do think that CJ Beathard would be relatively cheap and available. All right, so special teams guys. This is definitely a dart throw, right? But I did do some digging and looking into some past connections with Darius Swinton and with Brandon Staley, obviously. And then there is one that I just think would make a lot of sense in terms of ability and necessity. But the first two are Tanner Vallejo and Dennis Gardeck. They're two players who have been really fighting back and forth for the special teams tackle lead for the Arizona Cardinals over the past few years, where obviously Darius Swinton comes from. Gardeck might be a little bit more of a priority for the Cardinals because he did have 7 sacks last year. Not a ton of pressures. They do blitz a lot, so it seemed like most of those were from blitzing. But Vallejo has always been a special teams player. He was drafted by the Bills out of Boise State. And he did make one start for the Cardinals as an inside linebacker. Gardeck is an outside linebacker, so a little different there. But Gardeck's Vallejo's one start for the Cardinals as an inside linebacker. He did have 9 tackles, so looked like he played okay. The next one here is going to be Trey Marshall from Denver. He's a former teammate of Derwin James at Florida State, believe it or not. And he's been pretty much exclusively a special teams player for the Broncos ever since he signed as undrafted free agent. And he's led the team in special teams tackles for each of the last 2 years. Again, being able to fill that kind of gunner role, which is something that Tom Telesco highlighted in his press conference. They definitely need to do a better job there. And then the last one here I'm going to talk about is Byron Pringle, the Kansas City Chiefs player. Wide receiver who obviously has filled in some different roles. Very fast player. He ran a 4.4 at the combine, and he led them in special teams tackles in 2019. Has made some plays as a returner, so that could be someone that we could see the Chargers targeting in terms of like what they did with Darius Jennings last year. Obviously, Darius Jennings did not stay around, but I think there is precedent there in terms of targeting a receiver who can come in and fill some special teams roles and get a chance in training camp to show what he can do as a receiver. So That's going to do it for my list. Let me know what you guys think. I know obviously most of these guys are dart throws. The interesting one and the one of note that I think is going to be the one to focus on is the offensive line, because I do think they're going to get at least one like low key cheap signing to come in and provide some depth. They of course they could do that with Sam Tevi or Forrest Lamp or Dan Feeney, but I do think they're going to get one cheap starter, and it would make sense if it was obviously Kevin Beecham or Nick Easton, while they figure out the draft and stuff like that. So let me know what you guys thought. Again, please like and subscribe to the channel. As always, we really do appreciate all your positive feedback and negative feedback. We have fun with the comments sometimes as well. So let me know what you think. And thanks, guys. We will see you next time.